Every Starship before this one exploded on splashdown. Every single time. Then Ship 40 hit the water, tipped over, and nothing happened. No fireball, no wreckage. Just one small flame near the nose that put itself out in seconds, while cameras inside the engine bay kept streaming live seconds after impact. SpaceX didn't design it to survive this, so what actually kept this ship in one piece? Here's the data. 10 days before this flight even happened, something went wrong. Not during flight, not during re-entry, right at the pad, the engine's lit. 33 Raptors, fully ignited, ready to fly. Then silence. No liftoff. Nothing. For the first time in Starship's entire history, the vehicle aborted after ignition, not before it. Think about that for a second. This isn't a scrubbed countdown where a computer says no at T-10. This is a rocket with fire already coming out of its engines, deciding, mid-ignition, that something isn't right. That's a different level of danger entirely. So what happens next? You can't just try again tomorrow. The entire stack had to come down, not partially, completely. Unlike the old pad, where engineers could reach the base of the booster without moving the rocket, this new pad required a full destack. The booster rolled back into the massive assembly building. At least 5 engines were pulled out and replaced. Then the whole vehicle rolled back out, restacked, and pointed at the sky again, this time under a tighter weather window because a storm system was closing in. SpaceX bumped the launch up by a full day just to beat it. Why the rush? Because one of the core goals of this mission depended on cameras on the ground getting a clear, unobstructed view of the heat shield during ascent. Without visibility, that data is worthless. So they gambled on weather, and they won. That's the setup. A flight that almost didn't happen, launching into conditions that had to be perfect, carrying a payload that had never flown before, on a trajectory designed to punish the vehicle harder than any Starship before it. Keep that in mind, because everything that follows only makes sense once you understand just how much was riding on this single attempt. Redlining the sky, pushing past every limit. Here's something most people miss when they watch a Starship launch. It looks smooth. It looks almost effortless. 33 engines, lifting a building-sized rocket into the sky like it weighs nothing. But Flight 13 was never meant to be a normal ascent. SpaceX designed it specifically to hurt the vehicle, not to destroy it, but to expose it to stress levels beyond anything flown before. Higher dynamic pressure, higher heat, higher structural loads through the thickest part of the atmosphere. Why do that on purpose? Because every ounce of performance SpaceX can safely extract during ascent turns directly into extra payload capacity later. If the vehicle can survive harder, faster, more violent conditions on the way up, less margin has to be built in for safety, and more of the rocket's total capability can be used to carry cargo to orbit. It's the difference between a car that can only be driven cautiously and one that's been proven to handle the limit. So SpaceX pushed. And to measure exactly how hard, they installed something new this flight, load sensing tiles. These aren't just heat shield tiles doing their normal job of surviving re-entry. They're instrumented, feeding real-time data on how the attachment pins holding them in place respond to this new stress environment. Now look at the numbers, because this is where it gets concrete. At the 1-minute mark, Ship 40 was already moving roughly 200 kilometers per hour faster than Flight 12 had been at the same point. By 90 seconds, that gap had doubled to nearly 400 kilometers per hour faster, and the vehicle was already more than 1.5 kilometers higher in altitude. That's not a small tuning adjustment. That's a fundamentally more aggressive flight profile, executed on a vehicle that had never flown this hard before, with a heat shield being tested at its outer edge in real time. And it went through max Q, the point of maximum aerodynamic stress on the entire structure, without a hitch. No anomalies, no camera cuts to black. Just a rocket punching straight through the hardest part of the sky like it wasn't even trying. That's the first sign that something had changed. But the real test of whether SpaceX had learned from their mistakes wasn't in the ascent. It was in the maneuver that had gone badly wrong just one flight earlier. The flip that almost killed Flight 12 fixed? To understand why this next moment mattered, you need to understand what happened last time. During Flight 12, right after stage separation, the super heavy booster was supposed to flip cleanly to begin its journey back toward the ocean. Instead, it rotated almost 90 degrees in the wrong direction before correcting. Picture a diver attempting a somersault off the board and ending up sideways instead. Not catastrophic on its own, but the kind of error that cascades. Every second spent correcting an unplanned rotation is fuel not being used for the actual boost back burn, precision lost on a maneuver that has almost no room for error. So, SpaceX rebuilt the startup sequence, redesigning how the engines light in that critical moment right after separation to lock in the flip direction more reliably. This time, the cameras didn't show the usual outside view of hot staging. That shot was missing from the stream. But what we got instead was something almost better. A raw view from inside the booster's own engine bay, watching the separation happen from the machine's own perspective. The data backs up what the footage suggested. The Super Heavy shut down its engines about 4 seconds earlier this time compared to Flight 12, moving roughly 200 kilometers per hour differently at that same moment. Small numbers on paper, huge implications in practice. The sequence executed tighter, faster, and more precisely than before. Then came the moment that mattered most, the flip itself. This time, it rotated in exactly the direction it was supposed to. No correction needed, no wrong way spin, just a clean, aggressive boost back burn made even faster because this was only the second flight using the new Raptor 3 engines, significantly more powerful than the Raptor 2 generation before them. One fix confirmed. But fixing the flip was never going to be the hardest part of bringing a booster home. The hardest part was still ahead, and this is where the story stops being a clean success and starts getting complicated. Falling back to Earth, the booster's rough return. Here's a detail that deserves more attention than it got. After the boostback burn, SpaceX's own post-flight statement described the burn as ending early, not failing, not aborting, just ending sooner than planned. From the footage available, everything looked smooth. So what does ended early actually mean? Likely, the booster cut its burn short once it hit a target velocity or trajectory point, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it does raise a question nobody has fully answered yet. Was that early cutoff intentional margin, or a sign that something in the burn wasn't tracking exactly as modeled? Space hasn't clarified, and that gap is worth watching for on the next flight. Then there's the grid fins. Version 3 of the Super Heavy uses 3 larger grid fins instead of the 4 found on earlier versions, a redesign meant to improve control during descent. But for 2 flights in a row now, there has been 0 camera footage from those fins in action. No onboard view, no confirmation shot, nothing. If SpaceX has cameras mounted there, we haven't seen the footage. Not a failure, but a blind spot. And blind spots in rocket development tend to matter later. Now, the story turns rougher. As the booster prepared for splashdown, 13 engines were supposed to reignite for the final landing burn. 10 lit. 2 shut down almost immediately, leaving 8. By the time it actually touched the water, that number had dropped again, down to just 5 engines still firing. 5 out of 13. That is not a minor shortfall. That's a landing burn that lost more than half its intended thrust before splashdown even happened. What does that mean for the booster catch program? It's a strong signal. SpaceX isn't ready to attempt catching a Super Heavy with the launch tower again anytime soon. A tower catch demands extreme precision. Mistiming or under thrust during that final burn isn't just a rough landing, it's a potential collision with a multi-$100 million piece of ground infrastructure. Don't be surprised if Flight 14 skips the catch attempt and goes for another controlled ocean splashdown instead, buying more engine reliability data before SpaceX risks the tower again. So to summarize where things stand, the ascent was better than ever, the flip was fixed, but the landing burn still has real unresolved problems. Not a clean triumph, a mixed result with one major question mark hanging over it. Meanwhile, on the other side of this mission, something completely different was unfolding, and this is where Flight 13 stopped looking like an incremental improvement and started looking like a genuine turning point. 20 satellites won first. Every previous Starship test flight carrying a payload was, in a sense, playing pretend. Mass simulators, dummy weight shaped like satellites but with none of the actual complexity. Flight 13 changed that. For the first time, SpaceX loaded 20 fully functional, next-generation Starlink satellites into the payload bay, hardware meant to actually operate in space, even if only for a short window before re-entry. Why does that matter? Because deploying a mass simulator tells you almost nothing about whether your satellite dispensing mechanism works with real delicate hardware. Solar arrays that need to unfold without snagging, communication antennas that need to extend correctly, onboard thrusters that need to fire on command. None of that can be tested with a dummy payload. Flight 13 was the first time SpaceX put its actual product, the thing generating revenue and signal coverage for customers on the ground, through this exact delivery process. The payload bay door opened just as it had on the previous mission, releasing the satellites in sequence. This time, though, the satellites weren't carrying the same kind of onboard cameras used before to capture their own deployment. Instead, the final 6 satellites in the train had cameras pointed backward, not outward toward space, but back toward Ship 40 itself, angled to capture the heat shield in the body of the ship during a period when it's normally invisible to any observer. There's just one problem with pointing a camera at something on the night side of the planet. It's dark. Completely dark. No sunlight to illuminate the shot. So, how do you get a usable image of a spacecraft in orbital darkness? SpaceX's answer is where this mission stopped looking like routine testing and started looking like something genuinely new. The deployed satellites didn't just watch. They lit up their own spotlights and illuminated Ship 40 from multiple angles as it coasted through orbital night. These are satellites, seconds after being ejected from a rocket, still stabilizing themselves, already being used as a coordinated remote lighting rig for a spacecraft inspection. This isn't a completely unprecedented idea in spaceflight history. Decades ago, during the space shuttle program, astronauts aboard the International Space Station would visually inspect the underside of an approaching orbiter using the rendezvous pitch maneuver, essentially having the shuttle do a slow backflip in front of the station so crew members could photograph its heat shield by eye before docking. That required a human crew, a second spacecraft, and careful manual coordination. What SpaceX just demonstrated does something similar in concept, but fully automated, using multiple robotic perspectives, with no human eyes required anywhere in the loop. Minutes later, SpaceX released footage showing the full train of 20 Starlink satellites gradually spreading apart behind Ship 40, drifting into their own independent trajectories. This wasn't a passive release either. SpaceX confirmed each satellite successfully extended its solar arrays, deployed its communication antennas, and fired its onboard thrusters exactly as intended, all before re-entering the atmosphere and burning up roughly 20 minutes after deployment. Every single system worked on the first attempt with real hardware at orbital velocity. That's proof Starship isn't just capable of getting to space, it's capable of doing its job once it's there. With the payload objective checked off, the mission moved into its next milestone, one with a direct line to everything SpaceX has promised about Starship's future. The relight that changes everything. This next milestone sounds small on paper, restarting a Raptor engine in space. This was the first time SpaceX attempted an in-space relight using the new version 3 hardware. One engine briefly reigniting after coasting silently through the vacuum of space. That's the whole event on the surface. Underneath it, reliable in-space ignition is the single hardware capability standing between where Starship is right now and where SpaceX needs it to be for actual orbital missions. Without a working relight, Starship can only ever be a suborbital test vehicle, launch, coast briefly, come back down on a fixed trajectory. With one, Starship gains the ability to circularize its orbit, adjust its trajectory, and eventually perform the complex orbital maneuvers required for satellite deployment at operational altitudes, propellant transfer between vehicles, and any future missions toward the Moon or Mars. The relight succeeded. Clean ignition, stable burn, shutdown on command. It's the technical gate SpaceX has been building toward since the first Starship prototype flew, and it directly sets up the next flight's headline goal, going fully orbital for the first time. With that burn complete, Ship 40 had one final test left before this mission could be called a full success, surviving the trip back down. There's no gentle way to bring a spacecraft back from near orbital velocity, unlike Falcon 9, which uses a controlled entry burn to slow itself before hitting the thick part of the atmosphere. Starship has no such luxury. It simply commits, diving back at colossal speed with nothing but its shape and its heat shield standing between it and destruction. At those speeds, air physically cannot get out of the way fast enough. It compresses instead, violently, into a layer of superheated plasma that wraps around the vehicle, roughly the physical reality Ship 40 was flying through, at multiple times the speed of sound, for minutes at a time. Given Flight 13 had already flown a higher energy ascent profile than any mission before it, there was real reason to wonder whether re-entry might expose new weaknesses. It didn't, at least not visibly during the stream. The vehicle held together, banking through the atmosphere using an aggressive maneuver SpaceX has been deliberately testing on recent flights, a deep, intentional overshoot before realigning toward its final target. Why overshoot on purpose? Because in the near future, Starship's upper stage isn't going to land in the ocean at all. It's going to return directly to the launch site and be caught out of the sky by the tower, the same way the booster is intended to be caught. That kind of precision landing requires abort options, room to correct course if something goes wrong at the last moment. Flying a deliberate overshoot and correction now, on a flight where the stakes are lower, builds confidence in that exact maneuver before it's attempted for real. Then came the final descent. Landing engines relit. The flip maneuver executed cleanly. Ship 40 came down, on target, for splashdown. That alone would have been a fully successful mission by any normal standard. But then something happened that nobody, not the engineers, not the commentators, not SpaceX's own history, had prepared anyone to expect. The moment nobody expected. Every previous Starship upper stage that has splashed down in the ocean has ended the same way. It tips over and it explodes, every time. It's become almost a ritual part of watching these missions, the successful landing followed by the expected fireball as the vehicle loses structural integrity in the water. Nobody watching this stream had any reason to expect anything different. Ship 40 splashed down. It began to tip, exactly as every ship before it had, and then it didn't explode. There was a small fire near the forward section of the vehicle, and it extinguished itself within moments on its own. No cascading explosion, no total loss of the airframe. The ship remained intact, floating, still transmitting live camera footage from inside its own engine bay and from a flat-mounted camera, well after splashdown, well after the point where every previous mission had gone dark in a burst of fire. Why does this matter? Because SpaceX did not design this outcome. This wasn't a planned capability being demonstrated, it was an unplanned survival, which raises the question this entire analysis is built around. Why didn't it explode this time? SpaceX has reportedly been experimenting with adjusting how the vehicle falls during splashdown, testing whether controlling the angle or manner of tip-over could reduce structural failure. If that's the actual explanation, SpaceX may have stumbled into, or deliberately engineered, a genuinely valuable new data point, a Starship upper stage that survives ocean impact largely intact. And that opens a door nobody was seriously discussing before this flight. If a ship can survive splashdown without breaking apart, could it eventually be towed back to land for physical inspection? Engineers could examine the actual heat shield tiles, the actual structural welds, the aftermath of a full flight profile, instead of relying entirely on camera footage and telemetry. This idea has existed as a hypothetical for years. Flight 13 just made it for the first time, something that might actually be possible. Before getting swept up in the celebration, it's worth being honest about what the footage also revealed. Close inspection during the stream showed a number of broken tiles across the heat shield. Not a catastrophic failure, the ship clearly survived its highest stress ascent and reentry profile yet, but not a flawless result either. This is the tension that defines where Starship's development actually sits right now. The heat shield is simultaneously the vehicle's greatest achievement and its most persistent weak point. Every flight pushes it harder, and every flight reveals a few more places where it didn't hold up perfectly. SpaceX now has an enormous amount of new data to sift through from this mission specifically, thanks to the extended survival time of the vehicle after splashdown and the added information from the new load sensing tiles. That data will directly shape how the heat shield evolves for the missions that follow. What this really means for Flight 14. Put all of these pieces together and a clear picture forms. The ascent phase is now more aggressive and more reliable than ever. The hot staging flip problem from Flight 12 appears fixed. The in-space relight, a critical gate toward full orbital flight, succeeded on the first attempt with the new hardware. 20 real Starlink satellites deployed and operated successfully for the first time, and an upper stage survived splashdown intact for the first time in the vehicle's history, an outcome nobody had engineered on purpose. Against that, the booster's landing burn lost more than half its expected thrust before touchdown, and the early end to the boostback burn remains unexplained. Those aren't small footnotes. They're the specific problem standing between SpaceX and their next stated ambition, catching both the ship and the booster with the tower on a future flight. That ambition isn't hypothetical. It's on record. Following this mission, statements attributed to Elon Musk indicated SpaceX is now looking at attempting a tower catch of the ship itself for the first time, contingent on the new data checking out, in addition to whatever booster catch attempts eventually resume once the landing burn reliability issue is resolved. Meanwhile, the next vehicles in line, Super Heavy Booster 21 and Ship 41, are already deep into pre-flight processing, the booster completing its cryogenic testing campaign and rolling back for final engine installation, Ship 41 receiving its own engines around the same time. So here's the real question this data leaves behind, unresolved and worth sitting with. Was Flight 13's survival a preview of a deliberately engineered new landing capability, or a lucky outcome from a vehicle SpaceX still doesn't fully understand under splashdown stress? The answer will decide a lot about how fast Starship's next chapter actually moves. The data speaks for itself here. That's the analysis for Flight 13. I'm Adrian, thanks for watching the Space Brief. Like, comment, subscribe, and tap the video on screen for more.